Good morning. I have a question for you today. What are you afraid of? I have a fear of the dentist. I know that's crazy, but I had a bad experience many years ago. And ever since then, every time I go to the dentist, I really get nervous. And so I have to pray the whole time as I'm in the chair, Lord, please help me not to panic. Now, that might sound silly to you, but we all have fears. So, what are you afraid of? I was studying through my Bible and I came across some notes I had written when we went to the ladies' conference in February. I went to Karen Cavaniss' class on fear. And I was reading through it. I thought, oh, I need to use a couple of those points in my next ladies' devotional. So good. And so I wanted to make sure I acknowledged her that I did take part of these notes from her class, but I've applied them to my life, and hopefully we'll learn something today about the topic of fear. First of all, I want to say that God does not want us to live a life of fear. 2 Timothy 1:7 says that fear does not come from God. And so if fear is not from God, then it is of the devil. And when I am fearful, I am doing exactly what the devil wants me to do. Now, growing up, I had several fears, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, and then I'm going to apply them to some points and make some applications to fear. So, number one, when I was young, I my room was at the top of our staircase, and my sister and I were on the left, and my mom and dad were on the right, and in the middle, there was like a little landing area. And many times I would wake up scared of something, maybe a bad dream or a storm that was going on, and I would want to go across that landing to my parents' room, but I rarely did because I was more scared of the witch that I thought lived at the bottom of our stairs. And I was more scared of her than whatever it was that woke me up. And so I rarely went to my parents' room. I was convinced that if I stepped across that landing to go to my parents' room, that witch would fly up the stairs and grab me. Now that's silly, but I was really scared of her. Now, every once in a while, I woke up. I was so scared that I decided to risk the witch catching me so that I could go to my parents' room. In the midst of my fear, I went to my parents' room. I knew there was peace and comfort waiting in their room if I would just go. And so sometimes I would get up the courage, I would count 1, 2, 3, and I'd jump across that landing to get to my parents' room. Now, I want to say, number one, that in the midst of fear, we need to seek the Lord. Psalm 34:3 says, I sought the Lord, and he heard me and delivered me from all my fears. Psalm 46:1 says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Notice that phrase, and I love that. He is our help in trouble. The Bible never says that we will not have trouble if we're a child of God, but it does say that he will be there to help us through our trouble. When we realize that we have fear, we must go to God's word. We've got to seek him. Another fear that I had growing up was of a rooster. Yeah, a rooster. When I was 13, during the summertime, I babysat 4 kids, and they lived on a farm, and they had a killer rooster. They didn't have a guard dog. They had a guard rooster. Not kidding. Whenever I would get out of the car, that rooster would fly at me and chase me and try to attack me, and I was scared to death of that rooster. But I was the babysitter. I couldn't just sit out in the car all day. I had to get out. I had to decide to take action and get to that door to their house. I was safe in that house. It took action to get there. I learned to run very quickly that summer, by the way. So I want to say number 2, that we have to decide to take action. Psalm 56:3-4 says, what time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do to me. Psalm 12:2 says, behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. For the Lord Jehovah is my strength and my song. He also is become my salvation. Fear will come, but when it does, don't let fear paralyze you. You have to take action. Get out God's word. Find some verses on fear. Any of these that I mentioned in this Bible study are great verses on fear. Find them, memorize them, and quote those verses until your fear subsides. Fear and God's promises cannot dwell together in your mind. One of them will win. Now, are you going to let fear win, or are you going to take action with God's word and fight that fear? Oh, by the way, that rooster never did get me. I always thought he would catch me, but he never did. Now, probably the strangest fear I had growing up, and I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you this story, but hey, it goes along with the Bible study. So I was very scared of the space behind my closet. We lived in an A-frame home, and so our room ended, and then there was like a big gap before the end of the wall, and so there was like a big closet type space back there. And my mom would keep things such as her Christmas decorations back there, and I remember she had boxes that had some of her old toys from when she was a kid and things like that. Well, one day my sister and I decided we were going to go explore back there. And my imagination saw something and told me that it was Pippi Longstocking that was back there in my closet. I don't know why, but I was scared to death of her. I became terrified of my closet after that. I wouldn't go near it because I thought Pippi Longstocking was living back in my closet. Now, my sister, she knew that I was terrified of my closet. And so she would shove me into the closet and she would hold me in there until I was crying because I was so scared. What a word, sister. We laugh about it today. But when my parents finally became aware that I had a terrible fear of my closet, my dad, what a wonderful man, he went back into the closet and he pulled out all these things until he found out what it was that had scared me. There was actually a doll that was laying back in there, and I guess the light was shining through the closet when we went through, and my imagination turned that doll into a scary Pippi Longstocking that someone had put back in there that was living back in there. Now, my dad, he showed me the reality. It's a fake doll, Angie. You don't have anything to fear. And I realized that I had imagined this whole thing. That brings me to point number 3. We have to cast down imaginations and bring our thoughts into captivity. 2 Corinthians 10:3 and verse 5 says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ." Do you realize that most of our fears are things that we think might happen, but they never actually do? It's over 91% that never actually become a reality. I mean, if you think back to what you feared in the past and you think about how many of those things have actually come to pass, most of our fears are unfounded. Rudyard Kipling said, "Of all the liars in the world, sometimes the worst are our own fears." And I love this acronym of fear: false evidence appearing real. Now, my most recent experience with fear was, well, my husband was in the Philippines. He was there when that volcano went off, and believe it or not, that's not why I was afraid. That didn't really scare me. I felt he was safe where he was. But during that time, we had a situation at school that had to be dealt with immediately, and it couldn't wait for him to come back, and he wasn't there to deal with it. And so I had to do it. I had to call in some parents and tell them that their child had been accused of something. I had to call the police and make a report about an incident, and I had to handle that whole situation until he came back. And I'm going to be honest, I was scared. I had never had to do something like that, and I started getting very fearful. I had to go to God because I realized I was becoming overwhelmed with fear of what could happen through this situation. My body was literally trembling, and I was flushed. My face was hot, and my voice was shaking. I was letting fear overtake me. As soon as I realized this, I went to my room, I closed the door, I found some verses on fear in the Bible, and I quoted them over and over and over, and I kept quoting and quoting and praying and praying. It didn't happen right away. It took about 20 to 30 minutes, and I cannot explain it to you. But one minute I was shaking, I was fearful, and the next moment I literally felt a calm flow over my body. God had calmed my fears. He was with me. I believe with all my heart that when I felt that calm going over my body, it was God wrapping me in His arms. He was there. He will calm your fears, but we have to use His word and claim His promises. That brings me to number 4, and lastly, you need to face your fears. I wanted to run from that situation. I did not want to deal with that, but I had to face it. I had to go on through my fear. Proverbs 24:10 says, "If thou faint in the day of adversity, thy strength is small." John Wayne, a famous cowboy, said, "Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway." I want to close with some of my favorite verses that I quote when I feel that I'm starting to fear, and I hope you'll use them as well this week. Psalm 56:3 says, "What time I am afraid, I will trust in thee." Psalm 91:1, "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." And Psalm 46, verses 1, 2, and 7 say, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge." What are you afraid of? Feed your faith, and your fears will starve to death. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next Tuesday.